Right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's presentation. My name is Matthew Gilligan, and I have Kirsty Merriman with me. This evening's presentation is on Auckland infrastructure and problems that we're seeing. We are presenting on behalf of an organisation called SANS, Subdivision Advocates NZ Limited, and we're hosted by GRA, which is my accounting practice. So there's a little bit of background. The agenda for the evening is really about pushing back on dominant infrastructure decision makers. By that, we mean utility providers who we think are dominant in the market and making decisions that aren't optimal, or in some cases are using their dominance to extract premium pricing or overcharge. So that is really the theme of tonight. And we're here as advocates for the development community. So many of the members of our community have been complaining to us about Watercare, Auckland Council, Vector and Viola, and many of the complaints have themes, and tonight we're going to bring those themes to you and also go through some of the detail of the red zones and the development contribution increases which have been coming through. And also some of the overcharging we're seeing and what you can do about it. So welcome, Kirsty, on behalf of GRA and SANS. And Kirsty, you will be the main speaker this evening because you are an expert in these topics. And your background, please.
Okay, so I dare say my training is actually as a scientist. I've got a master's in science, but employed by Fonterra for about 17 years. And through that, I got quite a bit of commercial experience and marketing experience. Then spent time offshore doing some of my own work, and COVID had me stuck inside New Zealand borders. So I turned more of my attention to property development and got a bit of a taste for it. So that's me.
Mm. And you are one of the administrators of the Subdivision NZ Facebook page, which has some 15,000 members.
15,400.
Yep. And you were a member contributing, and then you got promoted to admin because you were so useful. And
so vocal, probably.
Yeah. And it'd be fair to say that you've recently recruited me to help you get your message out there and to clarify some of the messages you've got, and really that's my role. So you're the expert in this, and I'm going to defer to you this evening. My background, of course, is tax and legal structures and property education, and I just as you are, I'm a property developer in New Zealand. I develop land in Canterbury, and I develop houses in Auckland and Rotorua at the moment. So I'm in the game, and I've experienced many of these problems myself. So it's this is a bit of a give back from us because we're not being paid. This is a not-for-profit, and we're actually trying to make Auckland a better place and trying to improve the relationships we have with council and these utility providers by bringing to their attention the issues, suggesting solutions, and creating a conduit for pushing change in the form of litigation if we don't get the change that we think is correct. So it sounds aggressive, probably is aggressive, but things have to change. They're actually quite poor at the moment. We'll discuss that more later. So this was really born from, and these are your words, Kirsty. Do you want to run through where SANS was born from and why you decided to push for it?
Well, SANS really has been pulled together because of a phone call that I had from Matt a few weeks ago. Sitting in my admin position within Facebook and also a tendency to talk a bit on LinkedIn, I have got a lot of connections with people and we work very much together. So we were finding that people were just getting more and more fed up. So there'd be one problem, then another problem and another problem. Cost increases were getting so high. And then all of a sudden it was our Dear John letters, thanks to Andrew Crosby for describing them as that. Historical overcharging. And
what's a Dear John letter?
A Dear John letter is when you get a letter from Watercare after you've got your resource consent, which says, oh, very nice, thank you, you've got your resource consent, but you can't connect to us. We don't have capacity. So your hands are tied and all of your work and all of your money has gone up and nothing, really.
Yeah, so resource consent and building consent might cost you 100 to 300,000, depending on what you're developing. And suddenly you're told you can't connect. That would annoy someone. Yeah.
And the other thing we're finding is because of the unitary plan opening up backyards, we got a lot of, for the description, mum and dad developers. So very isolated people trying to learn what to do in a very fragmented market in a very risky and challenging environment. So we pulled together, Matt and I had a chat, and before you knew it, we had a wee group meeting and SANS was born.
And I think that there have been a couple of straws that have broken the camel's back. Many developers feel quite isolated and on their own, but they battle their way through. They're dealing with the red tape and the bureaucracy. But when Auckland Council put development contributions out, which many would label as egregious and over the top, and I don't think that's an unfair statement to make. For example, in Tamaki, they're pushing development contributions from 31,000 to 119,000 for a new house.
Potentially that it's out for discussion. Yep.
It's out for discussion. So they proposed a increase from 31,000 to 119,000, 88,000 increase. So, I've got a 29 units subdivision I'm doing in Tamaki. So I saw that and thought, oh my goodness, they're going to try and charge me that times 29. And it's actually 80% of the increase, which is a bit less. We'll show you that shortly. And, that infuriated me, that pushed me over the edge. And then others were having these so-called Dear John letters where they thought they had water pre-approved in a resource consent, because the resource consent say we have considered water and we granted consent on the basis that there is capacity, and then they would seek to get engineering plan approval approved, and they would be denied access to water. Therefore, their entire consent was valueless, and the value of their land dropped substantially because there were so-called red zones that were not published. And then, as more background to this, there were Watercare rumours that these red zones existed, and indeed there were red zone maps circulating that were leaked out of Watercare employees in social media. And so we all got them, I got them, and if you basically had a property in a red zone area, the implication was the value was less. And so people were selling property in the private sector with knowledge that these red zones were emerging and the value of their land would drop. And there were people buying properties in these red zones who were not in possession of that information. So that lack of transparency was wholly dissatisfactory. And indeed, at the end of October, we have copies of texts from an Auckland councillor to a very senior member in Watercare. And the text is from the Auckland councillor, can you please confirm if these red zones, which are rumoured, are true or not? And the reply came from this very senior member, and let's just say it's the most senior member. The reply came back and said, there are no red zones. That was October the 24th. And then on November the 14th or 15th?
14th in the mid-afternoon.
The red zones are announced online. So the lack of transparency, while firstly being appalling service and totally unacceptable, it is harming the community because people have information that the red zones are coming and they're transacting and spending millions of dollars, and they are informed with that information, and others are spending the same amount of money and they're not informed. So they're getting harmed by the lack of transparency. So these complaints are coming through to Kirsty and to myself, and this is what caused us to say, oh, actually, enough's enough. We're gonna stand up and form an organisation to stand for developers and start to push back on this stuff, because it's just not acceptable. And so we'll go through some of these things that we have observed that really are things we want to stamp out or to get clarity from, and it's for the greater good. It's not only for developers, it's also for the utility providers.
Someone's just asked, we're talking about Watercare, water mains, sewers, things like that.
Yeah, and we're going to get to the detail in a sec. And it'd be fair to say there's a bunch of people out there that know a lot about this because they're following Kirsty and Kirsty's posting on it. And then there are others that are just interested in wondering what the hell we're talking about. So all here. And starting with this slide, Kirsty, take it away.
Yeah, so there were red zoned areas. Of course, we were very thankful to have them published. So they were formally published online in November 2024. And the graphics came out, as you can see in the bottom of that corner, showing grey, blue, and orange. So depending on the zone, you were restricted to whether you had fresh water or not. You had a problem with fresh and wastewater or just wastewater. So if it was no capacity, there was no development and you could not continue on. Interestingly, I just want to flag that I was at an open home this past weekend and the real estate agent was very evasive about the presence of any restriction at all. Just flagging, you do need to be very clear that there could be a risk there. So if there is no ability for a new house to plug into wastewater or freshwater, you cannot build a house. Short and simple.
And in defence of real estate agents, because we know a few of them, they're not town planners, they're not consultants, and they've probably heard the rumours, but they're not in a position to give advice. But I would just say to real estate agents, pay attention to this stuff and get your teams trained up on it, because it'll be litigious, you know. And I think
a one-pager. Just give them a one-pager. Something they can put to say, we don't know, this is the website you need to go into, do it as part of your due diligence.
Or go and talk to a consultant that understands the issues, but you know, make sure you bring it to people's attention that red zones exist and they should check. Or check it yourself because we've got the online tools now. So carry on.
So we've got what we thought just at the start, and I'm going to do a slight modification here. Some of us already knew that Papakura was already red zoned. It's pretty much been blocked out for up to a year and a half. So this is excluding Papakura, but we believed at the time that it was only going to affect Otara and Papatoe. What we found out was far more extensive than that. It reached slightly wider into parts of Flatbush, Botany, right throughout east, up to the Hibiscus Coast, Warkworth. In fact, as I understand, it's worse up there, parts of Waitakere, and then surprisingly, Beach Haven, Birkdale, and parts of the North Shore.
Yeah, it's a massive part of Waitakere too.
Yeah. And some people were caught with whole development sort of programs in one suburb, because that's what they do, they develop. When they found out about this on November the 14th and it affected their site, it was, I'm going to be blunt here, it was actually devastating.
Yeah, yes, serious emotional harm, because you've got people who have been communicated that you basically can't develop in these areas because there's no public release of information around this. It's just bang, up goes the red zone site, and suddenly you've got sites that can't be developed. You've paid a big premium for the land. Now you can't connect to services. The value of your land drops. So this is, you know, it's appalling communication, Watercare. You guys need to do better.
That afternoon was a tough one. My phone was going red hot, and so was WhatsApp, red hot. It was very difficult to keep up. It was a bad day for some, November the 14th.
So you can see whether your site's affected if you click that link, which is the Watercare site link. I know it's a very long link address. If you just Google Watercare red zones, it should come up. But when you Google it, you get this page, and you click the layer list there on the top right, see planning areas, Watercare capacity constraints, and it drops this out. And so the orange areas have wastewater constraints, the blue have water constraints, and the grey have water and wastewater constraints. So if you look at Waitakere, it's a massive chunk of Waitakere and Glen Eden that's been affected by this, as well as Otara, Flatbush, out here, wherever that is. Where is that? Is that Clevedon? No.
Not Beachlands, yeah, that Maraetai.
Maraetai, yeah, okay.
One thing I just add in there is I was aware of this not the extent of it, but I was becoming aware of it through August because of the rumour mill. And it only really emerged properly when maps were leaked. That was 6-7 weeks after I first rumoured it. So that's
we got the maps too, Kirsty, here at GRA, and I couldn't believe it. Look at this, Pakuranga through to
yes, the zone. Yep.
That's a massive piece of land. That's a big chunk of Auckland being affected. So all of the development sites, somebody's paying double for the site because they've got a big piece of land. Now can't develop it for an indeterminate amount of time. There are some exceptions to that, which we're going to cover.
They believed when these first came out, that's what they believed because the email was no clarity.
Yeah. And there's a lot of little areas too if you go hunting. So the good news is you can put any properties you own into, put your address in, and it will tell you whether there are capacity constraints or not. But now some good news.
Yeah. And this is really good news. It actually came out, I was out walking yesterday and someone dropped the link into me. It's a good form, and I was actually delighted to see this from Watercare. So what you do is go in through this link and you can click through your suburb. It asks you a few questions, and the net result overall appears to be that if you have an approved resource consent and your EPA was rejected, they're honouring your resource consent, in particular for the smaller developments like 100, below 10 or less. There are restrictions or questions to be asked for those that are of a greater size, but it's actually an easy to use form, clear. And this would have been actually fantastic had we had it on the 14th of November. But the people that messaged me when this came out just had a much better night. So check that out if you've got a site.
So what you do is you put your property in and it asks you, do you have a valid resource consent? And if you say, well, I'm an Otara Pamatoi and I have a valid resource consent, it says, great news, we'll honour your approved consent by allowing connections to our services. So that gives you comfort, right? Because when it started, there was no connection. That was the applied red zone. So suddenly your resource consent went from no value, and you were thinking about suing Auckland Council and Watercare, which I certainly was on one of my sites. I was thinking you've in your consent said that you've considered water and there's capacity, and then you've red zoned it within a year. You know, that made a lot of people angry, and there was some blood boiling. And I think Watercare and Auckland Council either knew this would happen and were setting this up and were late to do it, or they realised how angry people were and they set it up quick. It's one or the other, because there was a groundswell for appetite for litigation. A lot of people I was speaking to were wanting to sue them for that. And there's some serious money in this, you know, in those areas. So anyway, now you can go in, and if you've got a resource consent and you're under 10 dwellings, then good chances are you'll be able to connect because they're recognising that you should get a connection. And we'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. But, you know, why have developers been blindsided by this, Kirsty?
Well, actually, I've done a lot of reading over quite some time, and I'm connecting through my observations. Remember, they are my observations from the items I've been reading. But we had a construction boom. You know, effectively, the unitary plan opened up land. We had mums and dads, and backyards just took up capacity. Then we had the national planning, was it PC 79 or something came out?
78, then 79 DRS.
Yeah, 78, yeah. So you could all of a sudden, without consent, put 3 houses in your backyard, and that would apply to single house zones. And these single house zones were actually single housed for a good reason. The infrastructure may not be able to cope. As well, at the time, there was no real investment happening. You know, things like the pumping stations, some of them were already at capacity. They were recording this. And people were buying their sites based on the zones. So you buy your site in, let's say I bought one in North Shore. Actually, I haven't been affected by this, but let's say I bought one in North Shore somewhere, and I believe it's a medium density site. I buy it. And then I discover that I have my resource consent approved. I pop in my EPA and I can't get it. I had no warning whatsoever because I bought in the correct zone. There was no map, no warning, nothing. Of course, the rumour mill was operating. As I said, it's been operating for some time. Maps were leaked and then red zones denied. But many people had no idea at all that the areas they were building in or purchased land in was at capacity. Birkdale came as a surprise. I don't know what else you've heard, Matt.
Yeah, well, we heard Otara, Papatoi, Mandarewa, Brewery, Weymouth. That's what got leaked to us. But this information can be weaponized against people that don't have it, because if you're aware that you're in an area that has capacity constraint and you've got a valuable piece of land that's perfect for development, and you're sitting on a land bank and you realize that you're not going to be able to develop it for 10 years, the value of that land is going to fall considerably. And so if you then sell it to someone else and they're not aware that the capacity constraint is coming, then the lack of transparency is harming the community. And that was what was going on for the last 4 months as this has been leaked. It's not good. But moving on, where are we at? 4 weeks ago, we know that the CEO of Watercare was speaking to an Auckland councillor and denying that these red zones existed because he asked. And you know what? If you're not going to publish it, that's fine. You might say no comment. But he specifically told Auckland Council, because Watercare is owned by Auckland Council, he specifically told a councillor, we've seen the texts, that these red zones did not exist. So that's where we were 4 weeks ago. They don't exist, but everybody's got the maps in the community. When I say everybody, some people. 2 weeks ago, Watercare released these extensive red zone maps, which contradicted the texts. And so there was huge concern over existing resource consents being denied engineering plan approval. Land transactions were being cancelled. People who were going to buy land didn't buy it because of the red zone. Developers were furious because they spent hundreds of thousands consenting, and now they appeared to not be able to get connections, which means their consents and their land were valueless until the red zones were solved. So 2 weeks ago, that was probably one of the main reasons, along with development contributions, that Kirsty and I started talking and getting furious. Yesterday, some good news. Watercare released forms showing that they would honour many of the resource consents that are out there. And they gave better clarity over timeframes and expectations of when the red zones would disappear, when they would heal them with capacity expansion. And they also released their capacity numbers and calculations, which is going to allow the community to look at what their assumptions and actually make some commentary on them and assess, just how bad it is in various areas and make their own decisions in the private sector about whether they sit on their land or wait. All of that is fantastic, because what it's, as we just showed you in the form, you can put your site address in, and they are actually allowing existing resource consents in many cases to be honoured if you've got 10 or less sites in your development. But if you have more than 10, you've got to go through a consultation. But they're actually being very reasonable to deal with from what we can see, and the transparency plus the reasonableness to engage is making everybody feel a whole lot better.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't. I think you did that well.
Oh, thank you. Why did this happen? 2 weeks ago it's a red zone. Now resource consents being honoured. New capacity network checks reveal capacity for red zone by area. We've now got this form in place for it. This is poor sequencing of communication, Watercare. You guys are just releasing this stuff with no explanation, and I think you've done it in reverse order of how it should have happened. There should have been some communication, then release the form, then release the red zones conjunctively with that. To just release it with no communication, it's really not good.
Someone's just added their comments to say they're getting responses back, and the capacity checking tool, the tool result does hold merit. So the engineers online are actually saying it seems to be all right.
Yep, and that's great that they've done that. So respect to Watercare for doing that.
Yep.
I think your communication could have been a lot better. You've caused a lot of people a lot of stress.
Okay, there is one question that's come up, which I think is quite valid. So if they've got that, how do they actually get some kind of support so that, let's say, they're in process or haven't quite submitted or lodged their resource consent? How do they hedge the risk and find out that actually the capacity will be held for them? That's something that we probably need to deal with and have Watercare respond to. Hopefully they'll respond to this at some point.
So here we are on the 28th of November, 2024. We're much better than we were 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, there was an awful lot of angst and anger out there, but it is better. So we've got to acknowledge that. If you have 10 or less units in a red zone and you have a resource consent and you're not in Te Atatu or Hibiscus Coast, you'll probably be okay. That's what that website is telling us. For larger developments with resource consent, you need to check with Watercare, use the form. And for new resource consents, again, doesn't mean you can't develop in these areas. They're signalling that the red zones are there and you need to consult with them to see if they'll allow the capacity connection. And that's really what they're inferring. So it's better than we thought. And when I say it's better than we thought, it's better than we had to guess, because they had no communication over this stuff. There was no public release that explained this stuff.
And we can't forget the human factor to that. You had people, I had people. Some people were in very desperate straits. That was unreasonable.
Yeah. So let's talk development contributions. And now we're dealing with Auckland Council for development contributions for the parts of infrastructure which they administrate. So do you want to just talk through who administrates what, please, Kirsty?
Okay, so we've got development contributions. So we're talking here about the money that you have to give over to the council for things that your building of a house is going to create demand for. So if you've got a small house, you've got maybe 4 new people, you have to contribute to the libraries, to the roads, to the reserves, to other parks and playgrounds. Then also you're going to create demand by covering more ground. You're building, so there's going to be less place to absorb rainwater. So you're going to be contributing to that demand. They then have got a forecast over 10 years. So these are the sorts of things we need to build to cope with the estimated or forecast population growth. So we might need a new library here, and this is the cost of it. Then that's divided over those houses. But I believe, not exactly sure, that they've now put longer time horizons in. So they're forecasting 30 years out, trying to estimate the costs of those projects and share that out over the new growth.
So just specifically, you've got 3 waters in there. So which waters do Watercare cover and which waters do Auckland Council cover?
Yeah. Just a minute. Someone said the forecast is actually 30-year, not 10. I'm not strictly sure of that because the projects seem to be rolling. They have put a 30-year out, and some have actually gone out further, and some of them are to 2064.
Yeah, we're talking about timeframes in context of
this.
You've got the timeframes of what they're planning and the costs, and then the timeframes of how quickly they expect those costs to be recovered. And so, if you're going to charge 50 years of cost to 10 years, we have an issue with that. And that's really the central theme of tonight. But in relation to development contributions, but Watercare carry which waters, Kirsty? And
the fresh water and the wastewater.
Sewer. And Auckland Council carry stormwater costs.
Water. Yep.
So Auckland Council have announced proposed development contribution pricing, and we want to take you through this and talk about the financial implication of it, because we think that if they do what they seem to be signalling they're going to do, they're going to create another red zone, which is a financial red zone, because areas of Auckland will become non-viable if they charge these development contributions. So they've announced the increases in the development contributions for 2025. If they come through as they are showing, I think they're outrageous. And the implication will be that development will become non-viable in the affected areas. And I'm probably being a bit hot here when I say we question the competency of people that propose the fees, but you've got to say, if you're proposing fees that make development non-viable, as in no developer will do it because the cost is impossible to bear, then you're defeating the purpose of development. Your job is to create infrastructure and spread the cost out so that developers and council work together. But your proposal puts the developer in a position where they're making a loss. So is it competent, the people that are doing this? Would you say it's competent that they're proposing costs to developers that make development non-viable? I don't think it is. I think that there's a lack of commercial consideration in these development contributions. So let's go through them. And the person that says is talking about timeframes, so it would be interesting to hear more from them. So the current DC charges are average to 21,000, and you can see this is regionalised. So Inner Norwest 25, Tamaki 31,000. So these are regions of Auckland. The proposed development contribution investment within the long-term period, which is 10 years, these are what they are by region. So in Tamaki, it's $40,000. So that's per anticipated dwelling that is going to be added to the Tamaki catchment. They're saying that they'll spend $40,000 per anticipated dwelling. But then beyond the 10-year period, this next column is wish list stuff that they haven't got locked down, but stuff that they want to do. So for example, in the Tamaki area, they want to do a Greenfields standard stormwater system, which is it 800 million?
809 million, I think.
Yeah.
Just 800 million, yes.
Yeah, so there's not a lot of transparency on what it is or why we need it, or how many people are going to connect.
I think they've kind of said why they need it, but it's not specifically clear on how the costs are built up, and some of the assumptions worried me, and I fed that back.
Yeah, so 40,000 per anticipated dwelling in the next 10 years, 79,000 per anticipated dwelling in the 20 years after that. So this is 30 years costs.
We believe you.
So you add them together, it's $119,000. And what they're wanting to do is to charge $119,000 to people in the next 10 years for infrastructure that's going to last 3 to 4 generations. Now that's for a single house. You've got to scale it down for smaller houses, because they do scale it down for a smaller house. And at the moment, the scale is indicated to be 80% for a house under 100 metres. But there's not a lot of transparency on that. Maybe they're going to dilute that down a bit.
Yeah.
But let's look at the implication of this. So if they're going to go from $31,000 to $119,000 for a dwelling, okay, so it's column 5. It's the right-hand column, because people look at it and go, oh, they're going to charge 40, or they're going to charge 79 after 10 years. No, they're saying they're going to take 30 years of costs and start recovering them over the next 10 years. And that's 119,000 per additional dwelling being added. That's a lot. And then on top of that, you've got to add the Watercare costs. So 119 plus 26 in Tamaki, 145,000 plus GST for a new house in Tamaki, 124 in Inner Norwest.
You mind if I jump in there, Matt, and
Yeah,
just give a perspective of that? So a perspective using a rule of thumb, if a house, a small modest one, say 3-bedroom, costs $300,000 to build, where 150 or half of that is materials, the other half is labour, so 100, 150, 300, we're then adding another third again for connecting to the system.
Yeah, it's $166,750, including GST, is
On
what they're
top of.
proposing, and so that's for the next 30 years infrastructure, and they're recovering it over the next 10 years. And so we have concerns about whether this is even lawful because of the way the Local Government Act dictates that council should be.
We're seeking advice on it though, aren't we?
Yeah, we are, yeah. But the advice has, let's just say that our council has concerns about this.
Correct, absolutely.
So let's look at how this affects feasibility for developers. So let's just take Tamaki because it's the most egregious example, and it really brings it to light. So if you're trying to sell a unit in Tamaki, say an 82-metre unit with one car park, and you might want 700 grand odd, 715. When you take out GST and agents fees, you get 600. And typically developers will earn 15 to 20% of that revenue as a profit margin before interest.
On a good day.
Yeah. And I think, 20% is not unusual. I see clients' feasibilities, but some clients will tolerate as low as 15%. So if they're doing 7 lots, they've got 630,000. If they're doing at 15%, if they've got 20%, then a bit more than that, 840,000. So you bring this down and you bring the increase in development contributions. Now, the way it's indicated, and it's still unclear what percentage of that 119,000 they'll recover per unit, but as it stands, it appears 80% of that will be payable for a unit under 100 metres. So these units for 715,000 are 82 metres. So you would pay 80% of the increase, which is 70 grand. Okay, so what's in that number? It's the 119 minus the 31,000, which is the current. So the proposed final amount, 119, less the current amount, 31, times by 80%. That's what that is. And then Watercare are increasing their development contributions by 5,000. So in the 15 to 20%, you've got the old development contributions. Now you've got to take another 75,000 off to take into account the proposed increase. So you would be dropping the profit from 120 to 44 or 90 to 14,000, depending on what your margin is between 15 to 20%. So you'd say, oh, well, that's enough for developers to make. Let's take off interest, which is typically 29 grand on those sorts of numbers. So your profit drops into a loss or drops to 15 grand after interest. Now, actually, if you've got a 15% margin on 600,000 and you take near enough to 30 grand of interest off, you're down to 60 grand, which is 10% on 600,000. You won't even be able to bank it at 10%. It's too thin because things go wrong in developments. You've got to have a margin up above 15% to make it bankable. So it's already marginal for viability, and now it becomes a loss or 2%. So the proposed development contributions are non-viable, uncommercial, poorly thought through. It's a tax grab. It's targeting developers, milking them like cows. It is manifestly unfair and poorly thought through. It's not going to work. So that's why we coined the term financial red zones, because this makes any area where you're trying to develop affordable housing unaffordable for the developer. So affordable housing will just stop. Development of that type of stock will stop, and
I think
will come to a grinding halt.
Add in the key point is they want the contributions to upgrade the area, but no one's going to build to even give the contributions to start upgrading the area.
Yeah, it's self-defeating. Yeah, and it's just looking at developers as a source of money. It's not looking at it as a relationship between council and developers and working together. It's just dumb, quite frankly. I'll tell you how I really think shortly. So the Local Government Act, tell us about section 197AA, Kirsty.
Well, I think the key thing is, and I'm going to start and say, growth needs to pay for growth. We have to build things and we've got to pay for it. But the purpose is very much to contribute a fair, equitable and proportionate. Now, I want to keep this word proportionate in your minds right through, because that's going to come up a bit later, of the total cost of the expenditure necessary to service that growth over the long term. Again, that's really important, over the long term. I think that's clear. You can move on, Mr.
Yeah, well, yeah, proportionate cost. Yeah, the word proportionate's important. And then you move on. So context of this is we're going to say to you that we think this is unlawful the way they're approaching it, because they're trying to recover too much too quickly off too few. So what's the basis of that? Well, here's the law, section 197AA, and then this next section.
Yeah, so this is here where they have to actually apply the costs over the life or the capacity life of the assets. You think the lifespan of the assets, but I think they've been quite careful putting the capacity life of the assets. So I don't, this is my view, it's personal view, but when you build, or Watercare, for instance, or council wants to build something, they're wanting recovery quite quickly. When you buy a house, your bank expects you to recover your cost over, let's say, a generation, maybe 25, 30 years. Council here, in some instances, are actually trying to get to recover the full cost over less than one generation, yet people in the future will be using it, and maybe the build that's done is over capacity for the current generation. It's been built to service 4 generations, but only now is paying for it. It does not appear to align with one of the key principles of the LGA, the Local Government Act. So you can talk about this one, Matt. This one gets you hot under the collar because it's Tamaki.
Yes, I've got development in Tamaki, yes. I'm not affected by this because my consent, this is an interesting comment, and I'll get you to confirm this, Kirsty. Your development contributions, and this is really important, so you want to listen to this. Your development contributions that you get charged are the cost at the time that you applied for your consent application date. So in my case, my consent was applied for over a year ago in my 29 unit subdivision. And if I was to develop it in 2 years' time, and in Tamaki where I am, these development contributions were brought in at this level, which would be a terrible thing, I would not pay the 119. I would pay the 31,000, which is what they were when I made my first application. That's my planner's advice. Do you agree with that, Kirsty?
Yes, but there's also a wee quirk that you can also use either the better of the building consent time or the resource consent. But the council generally, from what I've heard on my grapevine, will generally apply the one that's better for them. So it is up to
you've got to fight back. Yeah,
you've got to look at it carefully, and that's where you need to.
So there's a lot of money in that statement that we just made. You can pick the lower of the two, and your date of application is always going to be much lower. So is charging 119,000 development contribution Tamaki over 10 to 15 years, spreading the cost of the asset over the capacity life of the asset, to quote Kirsty? The asset's going to live for 50 to 100 years, is recovering in 10 to 15 years, spreading it over 50 to 100 years? No. Is there fairness, and is it fair and equitable to do this? One generation paying for 4 generations' asset. Current owners have their assets devalued because the moment these development contributions come out, in affected areas, they'll be in a financial red zone. So development potential becomes non-viable. Effectively, council's taken the value of their land by bringing these exorbitant development contributions in. So is it fair and equitable? No. And our lawyers, this is their advice. They have serious concerns about what's going on. But we've got to be fair about this and say it's really hard to see over what time period they're recovering what, because there's no transparency on it. And Kirsty, you're about to do a deep dive, aren't you? Yes,
kind of a deep dive, yes, because they've now, to divert slightly. So I responded to the proposal that came out with the material that was provided. It was extremely difficult to do because there were no spreadsheets.
So they're trying to recover $1 billion of, let's say $10 billion, which is the next 30 years budget over the next 10 years. That's revolting. If they're trying to recover the next 10 years cost over the next 10 years, that's fair and equitable. We think they're trying to recover the whole lot, the whole 30 years and 10 years.
We couldn't really find out because there wasn't enough detail, and I will compliment the council here. Yeah. So I put it in, it would be just over nearly 2 weeks ago, and as part of my submission, I complained about the lack of detail because I'm a bit into details. I was actually having to use extraction. I was on it maybe for a solid week. They have. When
you say you put it in, you put a submission in response to
their request. Yep. So, but they've since come back with the spreadsheets. They're big. I don't really know how to navigate them, so I'm going to have a bit of fun trying to do that. And they've extended the submission time until December the 20th. But
GRA will give you a hand with that. We know a few people that can help you with that.
Yeah, so that would be great.
So we're whinging and moaning on behalf of the development community, rightly so. So let's talk about some solutions. One of the solutions I think we need, particularly with respect to setting costs and timeframes of recovering them, I think we need more central government oversight, because you need police to police the police. There's a massive hole in budgets for Auckland. And yes, we've got to recover the money from somewhere or get it from somewhere, or we won't be able to grow our infrastructure. But it becomes all too tempting, I think, for that money to be pulled in at the fastest rate possible, and then the money walks sideways to fill holes in other budgets. And it
does appear to do.
Yeah, and we've got examples of that and question marks of particularly Kirsty's been doing research in that area. But there's a great piece of legislation that I'm not a Labour fan, I'm not a Labour voter, but actually Phil Twyford did a couple of really good things. He debunked the meth contamination industry, which was getting out of control, like traffic management. It was sort of the traffic management of the day. You remember he published the Gluckman report and said there's no science behind this. Nobody gets upset about meth in the rest of the world. Why are we getting so upset about it? Why are we pulling all the jibboard out and wearing hazmat suits and treating it like it's nuclear waste? It's just nonsense. And it was, and the Gluckman report debunked that. So tick for Phil. And second thing he did was he brought in this Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act, and the purpose of the act is to assist councils and central government to borrow and spread cost over 50 years. And so the idea, and this came out of Australia, is to charge a fair connection fee and spread the cost over the future. So if there's 5,000 potential connections, don't try and charge the first developer connecting, which Viola do all the time in Papakura. They try and give you the full cost of the infrastructure. Instead, recognise there's 5,000 connections, borrow some money, pay for it, and then charge a connection fee, which is the total cost divided by 5,000 with a bit of interest. Set up a scheme and spread the cost. No one can borrow cheaper than central government. Use their balance sheet. So good on you, Phil, for coming up with this. Unfortunately, it has not been widely utilised, and I think it needs a tweak, because when you're dealing with small infrastructure at a local council level, there are setup costs and practicalities of setting up such a scheme, and to put in a small bit of infrastructure in the backyard of Papatoe, down one or two streets, there's a mismatch there. But we need a mechanism like that adapted to local government to enable them to centrally fund this stuff and spread the cost. I think that's missing in New Zealand. In Australia, they do that really well.
They even did it back in London in the Great Stink in 1848.
Great Stink.
Great Stink. Oh, basically, they built infrastructure that lasted a couple of hundred years.
Right. Oh, yeah, there you go. I remember you've told me about that. Now, and we'll just make the point again in terms of solutions. Don't let council take infrastructure contributions off developers and then spend it on other stuff. It's got to be quarantined to infrastructure, and they should spend it. They should get on with the job and do it. And
actually linked to the demand.
Yeah.
Very much so.
So this
Kerry
example here, tell us about that, because
Okay, well, this is just my observation and what I'm linking up. So I'm a developer by day. So what we've got is Papakura, they pay $24,000 per stormwater hui. And a massive cost is going to the Auckland wetlands. So that's like, to me, it is draining a swampland if you look it up online. The story on top of the actual proposal doesn't seem to say that. So I'm kind of saying, well, aren't you draining land for future development? What has that got to do with stormwater runoff from streets in suburban Papakura? I don't know the answer to that, but something's not adding up to me. And I'm saying that the projects that are being done as part of the proposal, they need to be very, very clear about what they are and how they link to the growth contributions, or are they benefiting everybody and for social need? The Awakeri I was concerned about.
Good observation. So Infrastructure Funding Financing Act, it's Crown Infrastructure Administrator, and they, basically they set up a special purpose vehicle. The funding and finance comes through, Crown Infrastructure administrate it, and you use the money to run the infrastructure out. That needs modification for local council, but I think that is a good solution that Auckland Council need to look at. Now, this is your baby.
Yeah, very much so. We have to see what the next slide is. So the key thing is we've been paying development contributions for many years, of course, since the unitary plan came about. And there's a superb report. I don't know if Mr. Munro is on this at all. It was written in 2012. I managed to get hold of that, and that gave me more perspective. But the key component here is that the purpose of development contributions, as I said, is fair, equitable, and proportionate. So we're now going to start talking about proportion, because if you want to move on, Mr. Control, we have groupings logically. So councils, for very good reason, are allowed to group areas depending on their demands. So for instance, a suburb may be grouped for the sake of reserves or parklands or libraries, community infrastructure. When it comes to stormwater, they may be grouped differently. But the very, very important thing is that grouping is done to balance council's practical and administration with fairness and equity. Now, this is what I'm getting through, and we'll be talking about Watercare contributions. So that is where you have to pay a flat fee of $21,000 throughout Auckland for the right to have a water meter. It does not matter how big your house is or how small your house is, you pay the same amount. Now, just remember fairness and equity, balancing practical and administrative, and noticing that nowadays we do have computers and we're not using pencil and paper. So let's look at the effect of grouping on your IGC. So that's your infrastructure growth charge for Watercare for fresh water and wastewater. Freshwater is the cheapest stuff, I believe, to come in. Wastewater is actually expensive online charge to go out. Now look at this graphic here. What we've got is two scenarios. The top shows 6 little houses. So that's 12 bedrooms. Now that reflects how many people roughly you have living there. And those 12 bedrooms, there may be 6 bathrooms, maybe up to 12 bathrooms. For that site, we're paying $126,000. Now, when I say we as the developer, I actually mean the homeowner of each small house is paying $21,000 per house to have a water meter. Now, the developer has to make a profit. That cost is handed on. But let's look at the same site and let's say put 2 large homes, each with 6 bedrooms on. So we've got 12 bedrooms. That site pays $42,000. So each house, $21,000. So what we've got here is what I call a disproportionate allocation of the fresh and wastewater infrastructure. The little people are subsidising the big people. Now, I may be wrong here, so I want to be quite, if anyone knows better, please say, but I think they're using an average figure of about 200 or 220 kilolitres per annum for an average home. But the small homes probably are using quite a bit less, and the big homes quite a bit more. So I am, with my mathematics here, saying the inequity is 300%. We do actually have precedent from some cases. The one, I think it was to do with stormwater, actually, Ryman Healthcare in Pukekohe in 2018, they have a precedent where they said that 50% overcharge is extremely significant or extremely high. So I'm saying that that does seem to breach the Local Government Act, because it does not appear to be fair or equitable nor proportionate. So I think that's that slide.
So actually, the legal concerns that we have about this
fairness
is actually, it's not fair and it's not equitable, and we think that there's a potential to go backwards where high density units have been charged by grouping and recover the overcharging. And you might say, oh, well, how can you do that? Well, you are doing it. Exactly the same principle has been used here for development contributions to make significant recoveries.
The stormwater, that one is.
Yeah, stormwater.
That's grouping. We've actually got really good precedent here now with people recovering money. Not everyone, because they have seemed to have targeted one person to not recover, but we won't go into that. But this here is another example of what is not fair and not proportionate. So what we have here is an actual example where the developer did get it reassessed. So you've got the same site size, 700 metres squared. According to the unitary plan, you're only allowed to cover a certain amount of the site, which is 60%. So that's 400 metres squared. Now, this developer had chosen to do 2 standalones and 2 duplexes. So that covered the ground area of 400 metres squared. But the council, in their policy, multiplying it using a different set of mathematics than they do for pretty much everyone else. And they said, well, actually, we're calculating that you're covering 1,700 metres squared of land, which is actually more than even the total site size. So it's at least 2.5 times the site size. So you're going to pay us $122,000 for stormwater contribution. But if that developer decided to shuffle those houses together and just stick them together, sharing a firewall covering exactly the same area of land, they would be paying $6,500 for the development. Total site size 700 metres squared. So that's nearly a 2,000% overcharge. To me, that is, it's absurd. It's absolutely.
Can I just intervene and say, okay, so we've got legal concerns, and you say this, but is this true?
What do you mean? Is this true that this is happening? Well, yeah, because we've been getting the money back.
Yeah, you've done it 16 times.
Yes, correct.
You've made 16 applications of this nature, got 16 refunds.
Yes.
So when we say there are legal concerns here, council wrong. Kirsty's right. You can get your money back.
Yeah.
There is a lot of money that has been paid that should not have been paid, and developers are being milked.
Absolutely.
And so that's our point here. So we're telling you this, but for those of you that are developers that have been charged by Auckland Council for impervious services part of your development contributions, there's the ability to go backwards and get them recalculated. And we think that exact logic extends into infrastructure growth charges, which are Watercare charges. The same principle applies. The same overcharging has been going on, and we think that we can extend this principle under grouping from DCs into IGCs and get refunds in this area as well. So only developers and planners and people in the game sort of are affected by that and understand what that means, but that's a lot of money.
And it's highly significant because what we've had refunds 31,000, 2,000, 50,000, 70,000. And
what's your biggest one?
122, I believe.
Yeah.
122. And these are all in the affordable areas, because the more you intensify, the worse the situation gets. And people want standalone homes. It's not that much harder to do them standalone. Just because they don't share a firewall doesn't make them cover any less ground. Someone's just asked if we've had any success with Watercare's IGC refunds so far. Well, I only have so much time, and I've been focused trying to teach people about this.
I think the answer is we don't have any knowledge of it. But we think the principle applies, because if grouping applies to this, it applies to this.
Yep.
If grouping applies to development contributions, it applies to IGCs.
Yep.
That's the council advice to us. Right, moving on. We're not going to keep you all night, but there's a lot of complaints about Vector. And so we want to talk about whether it amounts to monopoly abuse. We're not lawyers, we don't know, but we'll show you some of the stuff that we're hearing and seeing. Maybe you can tell us what you think. So numerous complaints about Vector. One of the complaints is related to moving a power box on the outside of a building, which is the connection between the pole and the building. You know, those green boxes. It needed to be moved 20 centimetres to the left. And I've got a picture of it. It's probably easier to look at the picture. So this box here needed to move 20 centimetres to the left. And so Vector came in and they said, well, you've got to pay our design fee, which was $3,700. And then there'd be $8,300 of materials and $10,400 of civil costs. So let's just press pause here for a second. So there's some bitumen to be put around this box, and we need to move it 20 centimetres. There's probably an extension of cables, or you just drag the cables across. And this amounts to $8,300 and 10 grand of digger costs, apparently. I imagine you'd be using a spade for this, but they're proposing $10,400 of civil costs, $20,700 for traffic management. I don't know what your traffic management costs, but it's normally an application, which is a design element, and then it's $1,600 for traffic management for a day. So they're proposing $20,700 for traffic management, then reinstatement, 27, project management and site supervision costs, $17,400.
It's more than a site manager earns.
It's a car, you know. And then we need an arborist to monitor the berm, $3,000. So you're talking about a total cost of $72,000. And the building owner then got a private contractor's quote and completed it for $2,000. So red tape, project management fees, all nonsense. They already had traffic management because they were doing something on the berm. It cost $1,600, as I said, and the rest of the job was $2,000. So arguably you could add traffic management to that, because they piggybacked on the rest of the development that they were doing. But this is exorbitant, and this is a lot of the feedback that we get on Vector, and in my own dealings with Vector through my own development sites in Auckland. I find them difficult and expensive and obstructive. So Bayard's here, and really the context of this is there misuse of substantial market power here? And in relation to how Vector is working in the market. We've also had, and I'll just do this before we bring you in, Bayard, we've got some concerns about contractor interference being alleged. And by that, I mean, when you want to connect your new dwelling to the power pole, you're going to get a contractor. And the quotes from private contractors are substantially lower than the Vector quotes. And you just saw 70,000 versus 72,000 versus 2,000. But typically it's half or 75% cheaper. It's much, much cheaper to get a private quote. And one of my own sites, we had a quote of 90,000 and we got a private contractor quote of 20,000. And this is on foot at the moment. And Vector, the feedback from the community is they do everything they can to avoid your private contractor quote. And most concerning to us is we've got 3 contractors saying that they have been told by Vector that they are restrained from working for the public if they're working for Vector. Think about that. So you can get them to do the work directly for 30 grand, but they're being told that there's a restraint of trade in their contracts and they're not allowed to work for the public. What's that? Tell me what that is. Is that price fixing? Is that interfering with a free market in a position of power and authority over the market? This was really concerning. But let's go back to Vector costs and contractor interference. Hello, Bayard. Welcome.
Yeah, hi, Gilligan, and hi, Kirsty. Thank you for having me on board.
Welcome.
Yeah,
Tell us about your Vector experiences.
Yeah, I guess I'm just here to give my personal experience in Vector. Excuse the light shining through on that window. I hope you can see me okay.
No worries.
Yeah, so I'm just recalling experiences from when we completed our development back in 2023 now. And obviously, I'm trying to just recall what occurred with the Vector at the point when we were going to the kind of cost to complete stage of the project. So this is, drawing back to 2021 and trying to refresh my memory from that. But essentially, what happened, obviously when you're dealing with Vector, you're dealing at quite a critical stage in the project. It's usually at the back end of the consent stages of the project, close to when you're trying to wrap up your finance to go to site. So there's a lot of moving parts in that part of the process. So you're having to make quick decisions. And when we originally engaged Vector in our early due diligence stages of our project, we were given some indicative numbers on how much it would cost to connect our 20-unit development via Vector's services. And obviously we plugged that number into the feasibility. And I think at the time it was around, they indicated it was going to be around 40 grand. This was way back in 2019 when we were doing our feasibility. It transpired, we got all the way through the kind of consent process, right up into the point when we were ready to start on site and re-engaged, obviously, Vector at that pointy end of the process, the building consent period. We paid the design fee, as you indicated, Gilligan, in terms of one of the costs they asked for, $3,000. And they came back to us with a quote of $269,000 plus GST. The scope of works was to extend the Vector line across the road. We, acknowledging that we were on a main bus route, so it wasn't a straightforward road, to a transformer. We obviously were pretty surprised by this number, given the earlier indication that they gave us in 2019. Lightly saying we were pretty surprised. We were actually quite shocked. And I think we were shocked enough to start to question the quote. It started to push our feasibility into quite a fragile position with our equity position in the lenders. So that kind of forced us down a path of questioning the quote. As a result of that, we kind of tapped into our network. We're obviously well connected with subcontractors and project managers and people in the industry. And we heard through the grapevine that you could engage your own private contractors at Vector's discretion, I think was the language used at the time. So that allowed us to go back to Vector and quietly have a chat to them around whether we could use our own private contractor to undertake the works. And the response to and also to question their quote and see whether they were open to kind of moving that quote and where that number was coming from. They were reluctant to give us too much detail on where the number was coming from. They basically generalised their response to say, we feel like the area needs a bit of an upgrade, I think was the comments at the time. And you are at our discretion allowed to appoint your own private contractors, but it's kind of confidential type thing that not many people know about. So that was quite an interesting response from them.
We've changed that though a bit, Bayard, haven't we, by communicating through social media? And a lot of people are realising.
They're doing it a lot more now, I think. So yeah, we went down and got a price from a private contractor. That price obviously included various kind of out of scope elements, that out of their control, like rock breaking, noting that, the vector quote also included those out of scope elements as well that they couldn't price in. And the private contractor came back with a price of $36,000 plus just to do the work. So when you compare that to the end price was $80,000, which included some of that rock breaking I mentioned, and a little bit more of frustration around traffic management with Auckland Transport. But if you compare the $80,000 final price number to the $269,000 vector quote, and vector quote would have likely been over $300,000 because they would have encountered rock too. It's quite a substantial difference and was quite a substantial saving for us. And obviously,
but it's 75% cheaper, isn't it? The private contractor.
Yeah, exactly. And not understanding, the extent of what's involved in that type of work, you kind of proceed, you proceed with an element of trust, I guess. But it was quite interesting to see the works undertaken on site over that, what would have been around a 1 week period. It wasn't rocket science, and it certainly wasn't a challenging civil project, in my view. It was pretty straightforward.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think that's a brilliant example. Thank you. I think that private contractors keep Vector honest, and Vector is in a position of authority in the fact that they have a monopolistic position over connections to the network. And it is right that we're allowed to use private contractors, and it's right that Vector put a quote in. But the moment Vector push and tell the private contractor that under their contract they're restrained from dealing with the public, Vector are way over the line here. And I wonder what the room think about that, because the biggest concern I have is restraining private contractors from working for the public. Bear in mind, the private contractors aren't touching the pole. They're working between the pole and the home. They're working on your private property and in the berm. So why on earth would they have concerns about a private contractor doing the work and they're not doing the work, other than they're trying to scalp a margin out of it? There's no other reason why they would have concerns about it, because we're not touching their pole. We're staying on the client side of the pole. And what you're seeing is huge discrepancies, as Bayard's just told his story. My own, I just texted my business partner and said, because we've got one on foot right now, and I think it's 16,000 versus 90,000. He'll text me back in a minute. These big discrepancies where Vector are the only winner out of it, and it's increasing the cost of housing and, making many developments non-viable or marginal. So I think that's something that SANS is worried about, and we're reviewing that with our legal counsel. And I think it warrants a Commerce Commission complaint, and that's something that we are reviewing at the moment, because that's got to stop. That's harming the community.
And we've tried to work with Vector very hard. So throughout this year, we had several meetings with them, and there were a few people that probably on this call in those meetings, and what we learned was interesting.
Yeah. All right, Bayard, I'll park it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
That was great. Cheers. Bye.
I don't think we've got the others online, the others that agreed. So we'll move on.
Yep. So Vector had been gloating in their annual report that profits are up 26 million in 2021 from customer connection activity. That's the stuff that we're talking about. So these high costs are a separate line in their P&L now, and they're quite proud of them. So in our view, the best way to deal with Vector is to not deal with them, to use a private contractor. If they are restraining private contractors from dealing with the public, that is interference with the free market. That's got to stop. So that's really our message. And this is one of our contractors saying, yes, he's been working with them. They've got the correct qualifications, but now they're being encouraged to not deal with the public. And yesterday we had one of the contractors online talking to us, and he said that he didn't want to go on the record, but because it was very clear that Vector were, going to invoke the restraint of trade if he dealt with the public, and he had concerns that he said that out loud in public, that he might lose his contract with Vector. So,
and I had the same with someone on phone calls yesterday. They wouldn't put anything in writing, but again assured me.
Yeah, that's
why I'm comfortable speaking.
This is an organisation with authority in the market. What's the term that you want to use, Kirsty?
What do you mean? The misuse of substantial market power.
Yeah. You got a question whether it's lawful.
Yep.
Here's Section 38 of the Commerce Act. No person shall make it known to another person that the third party proposes to engage in conduct, whether alone or in concert with any other person, that will hinder or prevent the supply of goods or acquisition of any goods from that person, unless that person agrees to not sell the goods at a price less than the price specified by the third party, and the reciprocal of that. So you can't interfere with the market; it's unlawful. So let those private contractors do their work at the price they want to do it at. It's 75% cheaper. That's important. Viola. So Viola administrate water in Papakura. Is that the best way to describe it?
Yep. They're dreadful. So the same thing has been, because we've been living down there, favourite area of mine. And so really? They've been red zone for a long time. I only moved about a month ago.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah. So
up in the hills is nice, yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, no, it's more on the flat, but same area, same Veolia control. I've experienced it. For instance, you've got your resource consent. It states you have capacity, and you want to move ahead, but then you get a letter from a Dear John from Veolia saying, yeah, you can connect, but you need to install a 1.2 kilometre freshwater line. It's going to cost you about $1.6 million, or a 3-lot subdivision, $860,000 to upgrade 600 metres of sewer line. Now, that comes as a shock, but Veolia soften it nicely and tell you how to do it. Oh, guys, you can get together with your friends, your other developers, sort yourselves out and do all the work, but make sure we've agreed on it first. Now, tell me, how do isolated developers that are usually mums and dads organise themselves into a group to fund $1 million worth of upgrade that might or might not need done? Who pays for it first? What fund or facility or vehicle, special purpose vehicle, is able to put up that money? These are mums and dads that may be borrowing $1 million to do the entire development. $1.6 million to do a freshwater line, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. Veolia make no response, no comment, and personally, I actually cannot understand how Auckland Council can allow that to happen. These guys run roughshod. I experienced it in a development that I had no time, and we had to plunge our water main under the ground. It was just under the road, $20,000. And they said, oh, you need to pay for the traffic management. I said, but I've already got traffic management. I don't need other traffic management. Can you take it off? And then I was told, if you want it taken off or complain, I will charge my hours to you. So, hey, you need to pay it. I had no choice but to pay that $20,000. They did not use traffic management. I could not complain. So we've got lots of issues with Veolia. So I've got some in my database. They will all be loaded up. And again,
talk about that in a minute. But what I wanted to say about Veolia is I don't think it's a license from they operate under a license with Watercare, and Watercare give much better service than Veolia. They actually make an effort to fix the network
and to communicate.
They overcharge, and their communication's appalling, but they're trying to fix stuff. These guys, their proposed solution is to tell a full-lot subdivision to spend $1.6 million and do an upgrade of 1.2 kilometres of the sewer. It's absurd. it's uncommercial. Auckland's not being served by this joint venture. They have poor service, they're expensive, they're uncommercial. Everyone hates dealing with them. I don't know how you get out of it, but Auckland Council should get out of this, should terminate this relationship, or it's going to hold the area back. I think we need to wrap up, but we need to tell you some stuff. Developers should not be cap in hand to these monopolies. There should be rules that apply both ways. You know, there's rules on us. We've got to pay. We've got to behave certain ways. They've got to charge and behave certain ways that are commensurate with the Local Government Act. And it's got to be fair, equitable. It's got to be over a time frame that matches the capacity life of the asset. We need to start pushing back on these monopolies and enforcing it. It's a two-way street. So that's what SANS is here to do. It's about fairness and equity. It's not just about cost, it's about service, timeframes, all the things that we're not getting. I would say that one of the things I would like to see is a land court like we have in Australia. So when I was developing houses in Australia, I remember I had 10 consents in Frankston District Council, which is southeast Melbourne. This is about 18 years ago, maybe 17 years ago. So I had 10 consents, subdivision consents. Long story short, the Frankston District Council was as bad as any council around the world at getting stuff done. They were non-responsive and difficult to deal with. And my architect said, oh, Australia has a land administration court. For $50, you can lodge and you'll get a referee, and they're just like an environment court judge in New Zealand. They'll sit there and they'll look at it, and if they agree with you, they'll adjudicate and give you your consent in the hearing. And I thought this was too good to be true, but I lodged for $50, and within 2 weeks, I was sitting in front of such a referee, and the referee said to council, Frankston District Council, I've read Mr. Gilligan's application. I can see no reason why you would not award a consent. You've been ignoring him for 8 months. Is there any reason why I cannot award him the consent? Short story, council said there is no reason. And they said, bang, you will issue a consent to Mr. Gilligan in 3 working days. And if you take longer than that, I will award interest against you. And so that was fantastic. I thought, oh my goodness, it cost $50. And I got a rational person that rationally looked at my affairs and told council what to do. And they did it. Couldn't believe it. Other 9 consents I lodged. And long story short, I got all of my consents almost immediately out of council. They put everything on my file. We need this in New Zealand, like rational, independent, low cost, common sense is what I describe it as. It's in Australia. Why can't we copy it? And the other thing is I think we need more central government oversight across our local bodies. That infrastructure finance stuff that twice brought in, it's no good for small projects, but it could be adapted. That would be, and they do this in Australia. Why can't we do it here? Borrow, spread the cost over the users. Don't try and tax the first cab off the rank, the first developer in the street that wants to develop for power or for 1.2 kilometres of sewer, viola. You know, this is just not commercial. It's holding Auckland back. It's doing no one favours. And arguably it's breaching Local Government Act. So, your turn, Kirsty.
Yeah, so we, SANS Subdivision Advocacy New Zealand, the members, there are 2 that are facing it. At the moment, there's Matt and there's me. The others can't put their names out because it does affect business sensitivities and people are and have been targeted. So
we've seen it. So council or parties, whoever they're working for, say, we're not very happy with you because you've taken an opinion that's contrary to ours. So, we'll work with you less. That sort of influence. It's not good.
And Matt and I are quite happy to face it.
Yeah.
Our time to give back. So what we're finding is that our developments or claims get stalled. Consultants may get blacklisted. And the other key thing we want to do out of SANS is address really the fairness, transparency, and make things a little bit more simple and make sure there's more sharing of information. We should not be at the mercy of these monopolies and have them completely dictate to us. It is far, far too difficult. The amount of time, people know who I am now, and I was down in Takanini on Tuesday. People tend to know what cafe I'm in. I had one come up and talk to me and tell me his problems. We now spend hours and hours navigating council or infrastructure providers. So we want to make things change. SANS is an advocacy group. We now have a website, and we will collate everything together and influence for change. What we will not do is fight individual battles, and we will not pressure for things like capacity where it does not exist, where there is a rational and logical and well-explained feedback or communication. So remember, Auckland opened up land. All mums and dads, I see it as little goldfish came out, and then the sharks have literally come in and eaten people. So alone, you do get bullied and ignored. I experience it. We probably all experience it. The only thing to do is pay, or we won't do it. They've got the power. I think someone said, messaging through to me, it's called concession. You're crushed by finance and time. You have to concede to do what they've said. Some of the things, the behaviours, they appear to be that way, such as Watercare, such as Vector, Veolia. So together we are actually stronger. You know, we've got well over 1,000 people on the WhatsApp groups. We've got 15,400 nationally on Subdivision New Zealand Facebook page. I've had people telephoning me, offering me financial support, able to, rally around and get money. We don't need money quite yet, but together we can seek judicial review. We can sue for overcharging, and we can share alternative ways of doing things. I post a lot on Subdivision New Zealand. So someone has posted, say, how do I know to do it? Well, you need to read the post on Subdivision New Zealand. I post, many others post, but we won't feed you.
It's Facebook page,
yeah. But we won't hand feed you. Property development is risky. It's not like buying a car. It's risky. You need to read, you need to be educated, you need to have quality professionals around you, not just anyone, but quality ones. But together, we've opened up sans.nz. It's a litigation log. I'm going to hand back to Matt to talk about that, because this has been his baby, and his team have put it together along with someone else we've got sitting, helping us, again, from the Greatest Subdivision Facebook page, stuck his hand up and said, I want to help you. And he's going to be driving the management of this page.
So as individual developers, when you sit in front of council and the planning teams and Victor and everyone else, you're alone and you get bullied. And you've got a big gorilla on your back, it's your bank. And pretty much the utility providers know that if they just leave you, you get crushed by the interest bill, and you can't continue development without their consent. So you either take their fees, or you take whatever they've proposed, or they just leave you. And your only redress is a very expensive and very slow and uncommercial and financially non-feasible litigation process. So everyone just caves and pays. That's normal. Pay or we'll ignore you. And you're getting crushed by the finance cost and time. So what we think is a lot of the behaviour is poor service, but it's also a legal service if they're making you pay fees that you don't have to pay under the Local Government Act. So what we want you to do is go to our website, sans.nz, and go onto our complaints register and tell us about things, bad service or bad problems you're having, that you consider examples of the discussion points tonight, where you're being overcharged, or you've had undue influence pushed on you by one of these companies in a position of power over their networks. Tell us what's going on. And the reason why we want these complaints to be registered is we're going to divide them into categories. So, for example, this is the lodge complaint section. For example, you could pick Watercare, and you could say that you have been denied water. The categories further down for water. Or you could pick Vector and say that you're having.
It's got a different set of categories.
Yeah, that's right. When the categories are subjective to the provider. So just tell us the problems you're having, and we've identified problems we have heard you might be having, and we're going to database them into categories. And the purpose of this information is firstly to go to central government and say, look, it's not just Kirsty's in my opinion. Here's 200 examples of this. Here's 80 examples of this. Because when we stand together as a community, we're much stronger. You know, it's not just one developer complaining, it's 80 developers complaining. And if there are financial consequences of this, and there's 80 of you, we can sue them. And we're not suing them because we want to create problems for the community. What we want is to create change. We want to push back and say, this is unacceptable. And it's actually making stuff non-viable, or it's increasing the cost of housing. We're trying to make our houses as cheap as possible for the market. A lot of the cost is coming out of local government and poor service and bad behaviour.
Now, can I just jump in a little bit here, just for the vector thing, to say we're not doing this lightly. I've spent a lot of time over the past 6 or 7 months, including having other developers meet with Vector, with me. We have not been able to effect change by having round the table discussions. So we need everybody now.
Yep. So give us your stories, and we won't publish them. They're private. We won't do anything without your permission. Give us your stories and categorise them. Tell us what the poor outcomes you've had, particularly poor financial outcomes, or situations where, for example, you have got a resource consent, but they won't give you access to capacity. They're saying no. Tell us about that sort of stuff, and log it in our system. So what do we need from you guys? Eventually, we're going to ask you for donations, but nothing yet, because at the moment we're not spending anything. What we have done is set up a website, and Gilligan Rowe have paid for that, GRA, my accounting practice. And there's a bunch of people behind us, good people, who are experts in subject matter related to subdivision, engineers, planners, you know, these sorts of people. And they are researching. Kirsty Merriman doing an amazing job. And she's such a wealth of knowledge and has an ability to do deep dives into issues and join the dots. None of us are charging for our time. We're just doing it because we're sick of what we're seeing and what we're experiencing when we deal with these monopolies. But we need to get organised as an industry. So log your horror stories and complaints. And by databasing the abuse, we can fight back with litigation. We can petition central government, and we'll be able to make change. And that's what it's all about, making change, keep making things better. So the site is live. Tell us your stories, and we'll advocate for you. And if you are in a position where you think you've been overcharged for development contributions or infrastructure growth charges with Watercare, you can make contact through the same site, and we'll be in a position to represent you on that. If we do take a margin on it, and we haven't decided what that might be, but if we did take a margin on it, we would use it for litigation costs and SANS costs. None of the parties, directors or otherwise, are charging for their time. We don't want to make any money out of this. We just want to push the advocacy for developers in Auckland and ultimately for New Zealand, because this will spread across New Zealand.
And it's affordable housing. I think Shamali Kwa put out a report in August, and one key feature was the lack of efficiency and productivity in construction. And of course, housing, everything is linked. If a new affordable home is not affordable, it affects everything.
I think we'll wrap it there. That's very true, Kirsty. Unless you've got any closing comments, Kirsty? No,
I don't. Thank you.
We'll wrap it there.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks everybody for listening. We hope you appreciate the good work from SANS, and we'll be in touch when we've got updates. But thanks very much, and we'll close there. Good evening.